My study is English Sign, the bridge between American Sign Language and written English for deaf students. Most deaf and profoundly hearing impaired children are born into hearing families and thus receive little to no exposure to American Sign Language from individuals fluent in the language. 75% of deaf and hard of hearing students are actually educated in their local public schools and receive educations through listening and spoken language just as their hearing peers do. About half of deaf and hard of hearing students graduate high school reading only at or below a fourth grade level. Additionally, 7 to 10% only read at a seventh grade level or above. The writing samples from deaf and hard of hearing students tend to reflect dependence upon classroom lessons that focus on grammatical devices specific to English. And when students are learning to read, it's important for them to gain phonological awareness to later be able to decode individual letter strings and correctly identify words, which, when considering sign languages are composed of gestural units rather than alphabetic units, there's no direct correspondence between the two. And despite these differences, American Sign Language knowledge still supports reading development just as any first language aids in second language acquisition. Pidgin languages typically develop in social settings where two very diverse linguistic communities come into contact with one another, and the Pidgin language serves as a bridge between the two to allow individuals to communicate. And because Pidgin languages are not fully developed and serve only to allow necessary communication, they typically have very limited vocabularies and few grammatical devices from either parent language, and additionally having no stable grammar and serve a very primitive purpose. Pidgin languages, because of their nature, have no native speakers. However, Pidgin Sign English, is a highly developed language that uses many grammatical devices from the English language and some American Sign Language signs and fingerspelt words to create complex sentences, which serve as a bridge between the communities. My hypothesis is that deaf children taught Pidgin Sign English will develop stronger English reading and writing skills than their deaf peers who are only receiving education through typical English listening and spoken language, as their hearing students do. Additionally, children born to deaf families are expected to graduate at a higher reading and writing level than those born to hearing families because of their exposure to American Sign Language from birth and receiving consistent input from a fluent adult. Whereas children born to hearing families will receive some signing, but because their parents are only just learning the language themselves, it's not fluent input, which is detrimental to the child's later language acquisition. My participants consist of 10 congenitally deaf children born to a deaf family that are fluent in American Sign Language, and 10 children born to hearing families where their parents are just learning American Sign Language to be able to communicate with their children but never become fluent. As this is a longitudinal study, the ages of children will vary throughout the study, but they were all born within the year of 1996. And all participants attend their local high school, their local public school, and receive a mainstream education alongside their hearing peers. In the study, children will partake in check-ins that occur in May of kindergarten, 3rd grade, 6th grade, 9th grade, and 12th grade, where they'll complete a video narrative task and a translation task. The translation task, however, will be excluded from the kindergarten check-in because of age. The control group within the study consists of 5 deaf children born to deaf families and 5 born to hearing families. The group of students will simply attend their public school as children have done historically without receiving the Pidgin Sign English intervention. The experimental group consists of 5 children born to deaf families and 5 to hearing families, and the children will receive weekly lessons in Pidgin Sign English from kindergarten through 6th grade from a researcher fluent in English, American Sign Language, and Pidgin Sign English. Students will first be exposed to the video narrative task in kindergarten, where they will be shown a short video clip consisting of a simple story, which students will be asked to describe in their native or most comfortable language, either American Sign Language or English. In 3rd, 6th, 9th, and 12th grade, students will be shown additional video clips in which they narrate after viewing in written English. Beginning in third grade, students will then complete the translation tasks, in which they'll be given 5 sentences in American Sign Language to translate to written English, and 5 sentences in written English that they'll translate to our research in American Sign Language. And the sentences will increase in complexity with age, and this will be controlled for during evaluation. Our measures student progress will be evaluated by their reading and writing level upon graduation in May of their 12th grade check-in. The translation task student responses will be coded for 4 different error types, consisting in error in the main noun verb used, incorrect word order, incorrect spelling in the written English task, and 1 applicable to fingerspelling and grammatical use. And lastly, during the video narrative task, student responses will be graded on a 1 to 10 scale according to their ability to accurately convey the story from the video along with relevant and supporting information. And here is a listing of how the 1 to 10 scale is broken down. My results showed that regardless of whether a deaf child was born to a hearing or deaf family, they showed a significant increase in English reading and writing skills upon graduation. Specifically, we saw that children born to deaf families fluent in American Sign Language had slightly higher average reading levels upon graduation compared to their peers born to hearing families. And this showed the importance of language input during the first year of life and the benefit of receiving language input from a fluent speaker or signer. In the video narrative ratings, participants A through E were born to deaf families, while F through J born to hearing families. Our findings showed that Pigeon Sign English intervention aided children's ability to give more coherent, detailed narratives, including a level of grammatical use much higher than that typically seen by deaf students receiving a public education. And the translation task also supported the hypothesis that Pigeon Sign English intervention helps students grasp a better understanding of English grammatical skills, with a significant drop from 33 to 9% error in children born to deaf families and a drop from 26 to 6% error in children born to hearing families, which scored a typical 7th grade reading level, which is significantly higher than the national average of 4th grade for graduating deaf students. The study reaffirms the importance of a native language and its foundational base for L2 acquisition. The grammatical overlap between Pigeon Sign English and English give deaf students an introduction to English grammar, allowing an easier transition between American Sign Language and English, as the grammatical devices used in each are so different. Going forward, it's important to develop and implement Pigeon Sign English programs in public schools nationwide to decrease the educational gap we've traditionally seen between deaf and hearing students. And a possible research direction moving forward would be to teach Pigeon Sign English to parents of deaf children and determine if it's easier for hearing parents to learn Pigeon Sign English instead of American Sign Language, potentially allowing for a richer language input for children far before their schooling days during sensitive periods. And I'd like to acknowledge that the topic of my research question is not straightforward, and there are a lot of many different factors beyond those discussed that impact child language development, specifically for deaf children. And I also don't know enough statistically about language development to give accurate or realistic statistical type data for the study, so I imagine the data given here is likely not to reflect a real world scenario, but I believe the trends themselves to be highly probable. And here are my references, and thank you for your time.